Welcome to the Inside Pitch. I'm Christopher Lockhart, the creator and administrator of this Facebook group where screenwriters, filmmakers, and creatives meet to ask and answer questions and exchange ideas and information on the craft and business of movie making. So this is part of our series where I'm introducing to you members of the Inside Pitch who are working professionals. And today's guest has been a member of the Inside Pitch since 2017. She is currently the story editor on the longest running primetime drama in television history. Let me introduce you to Melody Cooper. So let me just ask you, first off, you're coming on to a show that's been in existence for 22 years, is that right?
This is the 22nd season, yep,
right.
That I'm on.
So how do you even prepare for that? I mean, did you have to watch all 22 seasons? I mean, how do you catch up on that story?
No. Well, that's a great question, because when I found out that I was meeting with Warren Leight, who's the showrunner, I said, I've only watched a few episodes. It's a show I've caught a few and thought they were really good. What am I going to do? So I kind of started watching the very beginning of the first season just to kind of reacquaint myself with the characters and their origins. And then I took a dive into the seasons that Warren had been an executive producer on before, and just started watching lots and lots of SVU, and that's how I did it. And it was good. It just got me into the head of the show.
Yeah, and there clearly is a lot. There's over 400 episodes. Is that correct?
Yes, there are over 400 episodes. They got a special. I saw this online the other day. They got a special kind of dispensation from the mayor of New York for their 300th episode. I think that was a few years ago, obviously. Yeah, so the challenge on the show is, so I'm walking into this room. The room is full of people. Some people have been there for only 2 years, some 11 years, some of them a long time writers on the show. And I'm challenged to come up with a fresh idea for a show that has over 400 episodes.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge, but it's fun. It's a great room. Warren is amazing. He happened to be the showrunner of one of my favorite shows on HBO, In Treatment. And he was lovely. He was lovely to talk to during the interview. There's a lot of synergy. I knew his work as a playwright on Inside Man. My grandfather was like his dad, a journeyman jazz artist. So there were just a lot of nice connections that we made. And I'm learning so much from him. It's great.
So the show shoots in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
Where's the writer's room?
It's on Zoom. So most people are in New York, one or two are not. I'm in LA. And because all the writer's room is on Zoom, we could be anywhere. You know, the time difference is different. I sat in for a few weeks just so I could get the lay of the land before I officially started, and it was a 7:30 a.m. start for me,
right.
Which was early, but I was so glad to be on the show. It was fine. But we don't have a super rigorous all-day schedule, which is nice as well. But we're always touching base and we read through scripts, which is so much fun. I love, because you learn so much going through. Just the whole room is reading and taking parts and reading and stopping and figuring out what works procedurally or not, what works for character, and it's a great way to learn about the show. So it's fun.
And you would think after 22 seasons, they must be a pretty well-oiled machine.
Yeah, I mean they are, and then Julie Martin, who's the co-executive with producer and runs the room with Warren, they both are experts. They're masters at what they do. So to be in a room where there's an issue and they just figure it out, and the stories can be very complex. They don't seem as complex, I think, by the time we see them, but what goes into making sure that everything works in the episode, it's very complex. And so even though there's a kind of formula, in some ways, every story is so different, and the way in which real life kind of impacts that, because that's, you know, we take stories that come from the real world. It's still a real challenge, and again, I find it fun. It's like whenever someone gives me parameters and constraints, that's where I have the most fun. So.
Tell me about your title, because TV has such interesting titles for writers. So you're the story editor. What does that mean? And can you explain to our members the various titles within a show?
Oh, let's see if I can explain them all. Well, first, you have usually, very often you enter the room as a writing assistant. Next step would be a staff writer, which is how I entered the business on Two Sentence Horror Stories in December. I was a staff writer on that show. The next step up is story editor. So I'm really still what they call a baby writer, because until you get, even when you're getting to mid-level, when you're a co-producer, but when you're a story editor, executive story editor, next up, it depends on the room, but supervising producer. You can be a co-producer, co-EP, executive producer, showrunner. So story editor is just a more senior staff writer. And again, it depends on the room, how the showrunner is going to engage you in most of the scripts, to, you know, have some input maybe, but primarily it's the next step up from staff writer, and you're writing episodes.
So on a TV series, are most of the producers also writers?
Yes, they are. Because they're overseeing, like Warren and Julie will take a pass on the script that I write, and any of the writers write in the room. They oversee a lot of obviously aspects of the entire show, but the tone and, you know, how each script, the final script is really in their hands, and they're the ones who do the final pass as really in the function of writers on each of the scripts.
So writing for TV is very collaborative in the sense that there is a room and you are working with other writers, at least as you break the story and you try to put it together. So what was that experience like, having gone from being a struggling writer and working alone in front of your computer, and now all of a sudden you're tossed into a room with other writers and you're swapping ideas, and maybe your ideas are getting shot down, and what's that whole experience like?
Well, I started out, I was in the HBO Access fellowship, writing fellowship. So they really try to prepare you for the real world in the room. That was a 10-month program. I just finished it a couple of months ago. And they put us through our paces, everything from how you introduce yourself as a writer when you're in a meeting, to have your whole intro and your whole bio down pat, to learning how to work in a room and throw ideas up against the wall. We had one meeting, one session, where we had magazines thrown across the table, and we were tasked to just tear sheets out that interested us visually, and then to pitch stories based on the visuals that we picked, and just do it like fire round robin. And that was, you know, just the idea of sharpening that skill of being able to think on your feet and be creative on your feet was just a small taste of what's required in the room. So when I got Two Sentence Horror Stories for the CW, it's an anthology series, short episodes. They're about half an hour long, second season of it. And there's no ongoing overarching story. So we had to come up with brand new stories for every episode, brand new characters, new setup, everything. And that was interesting to start out that way, because I was in a room of 5 we had 4 women writers and 1 guy, and a man is a showrunner. And we just had to keep on coming up with ideas. We'd go home and bring in 10 new ideas and just throw them around. And it was such a great group to do that with, because several of us were new. And one of the writers was Lucy, was in the HBO program with me. We were both the 2 kind of genre writers. So it was really fun to be in the room with someone who I'd gotten to know through the program. And it was about, you learn to keep your ego in check, to not get bruised if someone said, that reminds us of something else that we saw in a movie 5 years ago, and it's not as original as you think. And you just kept slapping things up and going home and coming up with new ideas. And because I'm primarily a genre writer, I write thrillers, but sci-fi and horror, it was like candy for me to be in that room. And the focus of that show was also, it was very women driven and focused on marginalized and BIPOC communities. A lot of the stories were. So it was in my work was very much in alignment with the show. So it was a lot of fun to pull out all these stories. And for anybody watching, if you think, I have all these ideas, but I don't know if they're ever going to go anywhere, keep them in a file. Keep them in a file on your computer, because you will, in this industry, be tasked to come up with a lot of ideas. And don't, so there's a home for them somewhere. And I know that that was my go-to for a lot of my ideas. I ended up writing 2 episodes. I wrote one, co-wrote another. And getting into the room for SVU is another level of experience, because it's an hour-long show. It's not an anthology. It's a series, and I was pitching directly to the showrunner, to Warren, and luckily he loved the idea that I pitched, and I went out to outline, and now I'm out to script writing. So it's been a great experience for me. I've learned a lot, and I've learned how to not take things personally. It's when you're starting out, it's hard because you have ideas, you're not quite sure when to speak up. You have to follow the hierarchy in the room. It's good to listen. That's the most important thing for you to do in the first room you're in, is like really listen and pay attention to the dynamics in the room. And there's a lot of information out there from, inside pitch, from a lot of the members in the room. I happen to have connected with Glenn Mazzara, who's become a mentor for me, and he's been able to really help me in navigating, the industry and the process. So there's all kinds of ways to kind of, learn the best way to navigate it all. And yeah, it's been great so far.
All right, so let's go back to the beginning. And can you take us through, even if it's just the milestones of your career leading up to your first professional job? So what were the things, like this HBO Access program sounds like it was very instrumental.
Yes.
And I'd like to ask you more about that, but let's go even farther back than that. I know that you were a playwright.
Yeah.
Where did you go to school? What did you study? Why don't you just give us a little bit of the bio?
Okay, so the quick bio. I started out as an actor, and I went to Adelphi University, and when I ended up in New York and was working in theater, I did a lot of Shakespeare, a lot of downtown theater. I didn't find many strong roles for Black actresses. And so I decided to start writing, and which is kind of insane, but I did. And I had come across online this story of this woman who had helped start the early labor movement in Chicago, Lucy Parsons. And I was like, how come no one's ever done anything about Lucy? She's amazing. She has this whole story where she met this former Confederate soldier, and they met in Texas and fell in love and fought the Klan and went to Chicago and started the labor movement, and he got hung in the Haymarket riot trials. And so this is an incredible story. So I wrote a play about it, And the very first version of the play was horrible. It was just talking heads, and I joined something I recommend very highly all along the course of your career. I joined a writers group, and the gentleman who led it told me to keep trying, and I was just like, well, okay, I will. And I just kept coming back with rewrites, and the play ended up winning the Jane Chambers Award and was produced 3 times, twice in New York, once in Miami. It was my first play. I was in it in the first productions in New York. And then when it was produced in Miami, I had a chance to step back and let somebody else do it and see it. And that's where I really discovered, you know, when I was a little kid, I used to love writing, used to fill up spiral notebooks with stories. And I think this might be my calling, is to create more work for other actors and to write. And then I wrote a play about Rwanda. I won a Ford Foundation grant to go to Rwanda to research the play. And New York Stage and Film chose it. Michael Sexton directed it. Denai Guerrera, who's from Michonne and The Walking Dead and Black Panther, was the star of it. And that kind of took me to writing for, I love movies, I always have. I'm kind of like, you know, weaned on science fiction, TV, film, and horror. And at the reading of this play about Rwanda called Sweet Mercy, a film director was there, Claudia Weil, who's one of the first women film directors who got any kind of recognition in our industry. And she loved the play, and she asked me to come to LA to stay with her at her place and just to like work on the play. And she was just very generous and amazing and wonderful and just very supportive. And she's the one who said, look, your writing is so visual, you should consider writing for television and film. And that's what got me started writing scripts. And my first screenplay was, it made it into the top 10% of the nickel, I think. And I was like first rounder or second rounder for Austin. I didn't know what these things exactly were. So I go to Austin Film Festival. I fell in love. If you've never been to it, I don't know what it's like now. This is a few years ago, but I went twice, and it was wonderful for writers. And I got a chance to meet wonderful producers and directors and other writers. And it was just like, this is my world. This is what I need to be doing, where I need to be. That screenplay, I put it away for a few years and then returned to it after I wrote other screenplays, because you get better with every screenplay. As I was told when I was at Austin, I thought I was such, you know, I had my badge, I was second rounder. They're like, yeah, wait till you write 8 scripts, 10 scripts, maybe you'll be a good writer. And I was like, who the hell's they? Who are they to tell me that? And it's true. I went back to Northern Cross several years later after screenplays and other screenplays, and I revised and kept working on it. And in 2018, it won the Grand Jury Prize at the Urban World Film Festival. So, so there's this sense where you don't want to overwork a script, but there is something that you learn the more that you write. And then I was around the time, I guess 2 years before that, I got into Shutter Labs, which AMC Networks was running for horror writers, film writers. And so a feature that I wrote got me into that. And that was wonderful. You know, the mentors were great. And it's great because the other writers become friends and people who either hire you or you hire or you bounce ideas off of for the rest of your career. So I highly recommend those labs. I did Writers Lab. I did Stowe Story Labs. I won the Tangerine Entertainment Fellowship for that. And so those, and New York Stage and Film I did again, but for film instead of for a play. And those, and I have like these groups of friends from all these different labs that I've done and fellowships. I got one that took me to France for a month in a castle in the Mediterranean, La Napoule, and I wrote a TV pilot that is now getting me in rooms left and right, because I had the time that month of really working on that. And then I was working at Viacom CBS in my day job, and in HR, and then I got the call about HBO, which floored me because they choose 8 people, and it's every other year, and I count those writers also as my friends, and they're my colleagues. I've worked with one of them in a room as well, and that Kelly Edwards was running that program with Robert Patla. They've both recently moved on to other very wonderful steps in their careers, which I'm really excited about for them. And that I found my agent and my manager once the HBO fellowship was kind of in swing. People were reading me more, and doors opened. So I'm at the Cartel as my manager, and CAA is my agent. Though as a TV and film writer, we can't work together, but they're also my book agent, and as a director, they're my agent as well because I direct. I think that brings it up to date. That's a lot.
And for those maybe who didn't quite understand the reference, there is right now a rift between the WGA
Yes.
and 2 of the remaining talent agencies, CAA and WME. And so they, at this point in time, are not representing screenwriters. There is a very long thread in our group, and you can read the entire history of this conflict. So was there ever a time, because I'm very impressed the way you worked sort of the whole fellowship contest circuit, which is interesting. We just did a panel on screenwriting contest, and so I want to talk a little about this because you really were able to exploit this.
Yeah.
Can you just, again, maybe just rattle off the names of the various contests that you won or fellowships that you were involved in?
Well, let's see if I can. It's not like, oh, I've won all these things, but I was a finalist in Screencraft a few times. There were a bunch of when I first, a few years ago, before 2016, I just was entering everything, and so I was a finalist or a semifinalist or in most of the major competitions. And then I took those scripts and I worked on them, and I figured, okay, now I'm going to win something or definitely be a finalist. And then I remember one year, crickets, nothing, none of the scripts of mine that had done so well did anything. So that really told me everything that I'd heard, that it depends on who reads your script. It depends on who's judging and what's in vogue that particular year. I found, I'm going to be honest with you, I found that winning them and we're winning certain ones, especially film festivals, that definitely gives you pop, right? It gives you buzz, and you always want to try and bounce off of buzz and to being represented, which is why I was doing it. And I also want to learn, is my work cutting it, But I'm going to say that I prefer the labs to the contests, because the labs put you in a room where you're working on the work and you're working to make it so that it would cut it in the industry when it to be made, as opposed to, this is a good script and good writing. That does not necessarily get you fully to the table. Even the pilot that I mentioned, well, and you wanted me to mention the Writers Lab, Shutter Lab, Stowe Story Lab, New York Stage and Film. I know I'm forgetting something, and they're going to be really mad at me that I forgot. HBO, obviously. There's another one I did, but the labs are great because Joshua Astrakhan was my mentor at New York Stage and Film when I had my feature script that we were working on, and he produced It Follows and a number of other films. He has a very long career, and he read. Not only did he, of course, read my script, but he sat with me and went through every single page of my script. It was incredible, and you can't buy that, right? So I just found that the labs were great, as I said, in connecting you with mentors who have written me letters of recommendation, who could recommend you for the room, for other projects. And then also other colleagues. A lot of my colleagues have gone on to work on Lena Waithe shows and have their own things going on, working on film. And so it's great to see all these boats lifting, and you're in with those boats. It's fun, and a good lab will put you through your paces and really work you hard and make you cry sometimes and make you question, but it's there to make you a better writer and get you ready for the professional world, which is different than, for me, was different than just winning the contest. But winning the contest or placing or even entering them has absolute value.
Sometimes people get lucky in this business, but I don't know if I hear a whole lot of luck here. I hear a whole lot of work. And interestingly, I interviewed Jay Arnold, another member of our group, and he sort of had that same, there was that same fortitude, that same, I got to go out there, like I got to kick ass, I got to pull all the strings, I have to make this happen for myself. Mm-hmm. I mean, would that be a fair assessment?
Yes. And I have this card I keep that says never, never, never give up. That's the first thing. And then when I didn't have a manager, I would reach out to people very specifically. I would research them, do my due diligence. I would find out what producers and what's executives and what managers wanted to see the kind of work that I created. And I would reach out to them. And 9 times out of 10, they would respond, and they would give me a read. As the important thing is to also touch base with people as you win or place. I would do that as well. I because I didn't have a manager or an agent, I would, once I made a connection with someone, I would keep in touch with them. So when I won something, or was chosen for a lab, I would just let them know. I wouldn't ask them for anything. I would just let them know, this is what's going on for me. And sometimes you think it's going into a void, but I'm going to tell you, I have an executive that I'm working with now to develop a series at a major production company. And when I first wrote to her, when I first met her, she was more junior level at this company. And I just kept in touch with her. She loved my work, and there was nothing for me at the time. So I just, maybe once a month, once every other month, let her know what was going on. And she told me last month that it was the best thing I could have done because it kept me in the forefront of her mind. She was promoted to a position where she could actually develop something. And then she reached out to me and said, what do you have? We want to work with you. And because I kept in touch with her, about where I was and in my career and what was going on, she remembered me and she reached out. So don't think it's going out into the void. Also, I had another executive tell me, we've been watching you and following you. So if you're beginning to if you're beginning to win or place, there are people who are keeping tabs. They want to see what are the work you're coming up with. Is it just one script you just keep re-entering? Do you have new work? Is it fresh? Are you moving forward? Are you digging in and working? Are you creating in all kinds of different ways? One of the things that managers and agents have told me again and again, they like the fact that I'm prolific because I'm working in a comic book, I'm writing a book, I'm directing, I write fairly quickly, and I write pilots and plays and films, and not everybody has to do all of that, but there is a sense, especially with the need for content. You see that there's so many streamers right now. The world and the industry, even now, is with the pandemic, is hungry for content. So the more that you can generate in a way, so you're creating quality, but that you are, the sense is that you can create, more than just one or two scripts, the better. And there are people out there who are following. Same thing for Sundance. I've applied to Sundance for plays, for films, for TV. The closest I've gotten is Currently, which is pretty far. I won't say any more about it because I don't want to jinx it. But they take notice. They take notice of the trajectory of what you're doing and if you're sticking with it. So if this is your passion and you're working hard, and keep doing it, because it's sometimes you don't think anyone's paying attention, but you'd be surprised.
What was the process for getting into the HBO Access program? Was it just filling out an application? How does that work?
I have to remember. Filling out an application, you had to submit. Two. If I remember correctly, there was a TV pilot, and then they asked for, if you made it to the next level, there were some essays to fill out as well. The essays, and then once you made it to the first round, there was an interview, a phone interview, and then they wanted to see another, to make it to the next step. They wanted to see another script, and I was nervous about that because I'm a genre writer, and I submitted a horror pilot, and this is the same pilot that's been, you know, kind of opening doors for me, and they loved it, and they wanted to see something else, and everybody had said, including they, were like, send us your strongest writing. And I had this script that had won the Grand Joy Prize at Urban World, and I really liked it, and I thought that it showed another strong aspect of my writing, but it wasn't pure genre. There was magical realism in it, but it wasn't sci-fi, it wasn't horror. And I took a risk, and I sent it, and then they called me I had an in-person meeting. I could have done it by Zoom, but I flew to LA because I knew it's much better to be in person. And we had to pitch 3 new ideas separate from anything we sent them. So that was the beginning of seeing, how do you deal with pitching? And I remember I think I pitched 3 ideas, and then I said I had a 4th. They said, oh. Wow. So I said, okay. So I pitched the 4th, and the room is like crickets, cold, dead. And later to find out, it's clear that they want to know, how do you deal with rejection? And it's important, because you're going to be rejected left and right, even when your work is amazing, even when 20 people tell you, even when you win awards, that same work that wins awards will be rejected in the business. So it's important to be able to remain on your game even when you're rejected. And so that was the process for HBO. And then we had boot camp for a week, which I went out for. And then they had once a month meetings. We had assignments. We had mentors like Craig Mazin and others who came in who were amazing, and Charles Murray. And but I flew out for all the meetings because again, for me, I used my frequent flyer, however I could get there, because it makes a difference when you're in person. Now we're in a different world. Now I could have done it myself. I could have saved myself, but at that time, in person was everything for me. Yeah. So.
Historically, there has been a dearth of people of color working in television, and even more so with women of color. And since now, very recently, Hollywood is really trying to sort of step it up and do its due diligence. And what is your take on this? Are you seeing more diversity around you?
I'm seeing we're talking about diversity, and I'm part of that, right? I did a Juneteenth WGA panel with Color of Change and several showrunners. I was the baby writer on the panel, and we were talking about the lack of diversity. And what came up with Color of Change was, in particular, on the police shows, there's very few Black writers, and here you are having Black perpetrators, Black community dealt with, and even Black characters, and on the police force, and you don't have any Black writers. And then not long after that, an SVP at NBC had read one of my plays, the play I told you about Rwanda, and passed it along, and that got me into a meeting, and that got me onto SVU, which shocked me, because I'm like, where's my, I'm writing a comic book right now for humanoids, and I just came off of a horror show, so I'm like, what? But it's because I'm very political, and everything I write has a social political bent to it. It absolutely makes sense. I'm seeing that a lot of shows are talking about it, which is great. We had this. We have it happen in cycles. It happened in the '90s. You know, it's been happening, and it remains to be seen if it will stick and how far we will go. But for me, it's, do you have more than one person of color? And I say BIPOC, but you know, as a Black writer, like, do you have more than one dot in the room? Is how I put it, because Glenn Mazzara says it about women, and also about writers of color. When you only have one woman in the room or one Black writer in the room, it's harder to have your voice heard in the society that we are living in right now. So that's what was so wonderful about Two Sentence Horror Stories. To be in a horror room with 4 women, that's like unheard of in a writer's room. And the kind of stories that we were throwing around and able to tell were different than other horror stories I've come across. And that's the beauty of it. It's not to say that white writers shouldn't be in the room. It's to say that when we're all kind of in this to use a kind of horror reference, a weave world of all of us working, you know, bringing all of our threads together, the stories are more compelling, they're more interesting. And, you know, I'm a great believer that, you know, I want to tell stories that have Black characters and from the Black perspective. I also want to tell a story that maybe happens to have a white man in it, or a Native American woman, that my Black perspective is brought to the table because I'm telling the story. And that, I think, should go true for, you know, if an Asian writer is hired into the room, they shouldn't be relegated to only writing about Asian characters.
Right.
You know, and you know, we know that white writers have written about Black characters for decades. So it's about opening up the world, and we see that it's lucrative. I mean, Black Panther did really well, and a lot of other work, that Hidden Figures and a lot of other work that we see. You know, Hidden Figures was not written by a person of color, but the story is about people of color. So I have hope, but with some reservations, and I think we just have to, everybody has to put their money where their mouth is and really make sure to keep the doors open, and to make sure that we don't drop the ball and walk away from this kind of really good initiative as the years go on.
Yeah, like my talent agency has partnered with Michael B. Jordan in an effort to see active change rather than just a lot of lip service, which is sort of Hollywood's way. Because I think what we often do is we get very passionate about something, but then another issue comes along. Because if you remember, a few years ago, we had Oscars So White, but then that got sidelined for Me Too. And then sort of Me Too now gets sidelined a little bit for the diversity issue. And I'm just not quite sure, since they're all kind of diversity issues, why we just can't stir them all into one big pot.
Well, that's the fallacy, is that it's like there's only this one little wedge of a pie and one of you gets it, and the rest of the wedge of the other 80% is like not for your purveyance. It's only for, so that's a problem. And then too, we're in a point where things are stalled in the industry, right? So everyone can say, yeah, we're going to hire all these people, but you know, until we go forward with production and all these jobs really start flowing, you know, it remains to be seen how many women or, you know, or anyone else who's marginalized is going to get hired on a larger scale. And it's not just about being in the room, it's about being promoted. WGAW really makes a point about this as well, that in Color of Change, you know, we have to have BIPOC showrunners and executives who make the decision at networks. That's when you're really going to see the change, when you see people moving up through the ranks, and that remains to be seen as well.
So what advice do you have for people of color, and maybe even more specifically women of color, who are now where you were when you joined the Inside Pitch, let's say?
I would say connect with every group. Make sure you're following Macro and Lena Waithe and Issa Rae. Make sure, and Viola Davis has a production company. Really make sure you're tapped in and connected with the community for your you know, whatever group you're from, connect with the artist community that already exists, because you're going to find out about things. You'll be able to hit the ground running. You'll be also able to kind of talk through whatever issues you're encountering, so it's not so debilitating when you do hit hurdles. Some of those hurdles have nothing to do with your race and have nothing to do with your gender. They might have to do with the quality of your work, and sometimes it's the other way around. So it's always good to have a good group as a detector, you know, to really know to know what's really going on. And then I'd say this is your time. I mean, it's don't let anybody tell you it isn't. In my mind, it was always my time, because I just believed so strongly in what I was writing. I just kept writing it until the world caught up with me. And I think that's the way you have to think about it. You know, whoever you are as a writer, whatever you're writing, it may not be that everybody's falling over themselves for it this year, but in 2 years, you don't know. So if it's, you know, be true to your voice and be true to the stories that you need to tell. And that is, I think, the most important thing, to do. Do not let yourself be deterred and discouraged.
Because this is a meet and greet that we're introducing you to the members of our group, there was a recent event that occurred in Central Park between a black bird watcher and a white female dog walker. Can you tell me what your connection is to that?
Yes. Well, I saw that video on the morning that it was posted on my brother's Facebook page. So Chris Cooper is you're referencing, and that's my brother. And I am the one who posted that video on Twitter that went viral to, I think it's up to 45 million views now. So that was, and it's interesting because my brother and I have been activists all our lives since we were literally in strollers. You know, we ended up doing The View, and we were on Christiane Amanpour on CNN and doing all these news kind of interviews. And Time magazine has a video documentary that I'm featured in now. And for me, it was still fitting with my writing in a weird way. Well, not in a weird way, because that's what I write about. So to have a platform to talk about inequity and to talk about the ways that racism is weaponized, that was all in keeping with the very things that I write about in my stories. So and what I believe in personally. So it was actually a strange way to kind of bring all these threads together for me as an activist and as a human being, as a woman, as a Black woman, as a writer, as a filmmaker. It was just this hot point, and it felt it was, you know, a little overwhelming, because, you know, it was a little overwhelming, but I've been glad for it, and because of the platform it's given me to address issues that needed to be addressed.
It really, I think, forced a lot of white people to examine the reality, the truth of white privilege, where there is still, you know, a large section of the white population that denies it or just doesn't believe it exists. But to me, that was really sort of a brilliant, like if you were going to write it, it was a brilliant representation of it, because this woman she was probably liberal. You know,
well, she's a Democrat, as I remember, and also in New York, and it's
right. Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I posted it, is because, I mean, besides the fact that I thought I did want to make sure she didn't do it to anybody else again, or my brother. It's that, you know, we think racists wear MAGA hats and drive pickup trucks, and it's, you know, it's only a certain type down south. And, you know, this pilot that I have is about sundown towns. And when I did research for it, sundown towns, which were towns that Black people, also Japanese, Jewish, Native American, Mexican, could not be in after dark, or they would be beaten up or killed. They existed across the entire country, in Darien, Connecticut, in LA, in towns across the country, not just in the South. So, so it's a way, it was a definite, I wanted to call attention to that we need to really look at where it exists in our own hearts, and where it exists in our families and our workplaces, and call it to task. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So Before we close, how can members utilize social media? How can they utilize a group like the Inside Pitch to help advance them in their career?
I think it's about connecting. It's about I think one of the first things you do, especially if you're new, just read, just see what other people are posting. And there are wonderful videos and articles. And that's the whenever I join a room, that's what I do first in the group. I read what others are posting and get to know the dynamics of the room and who's in it, and you can learn a lot that way. And then you can ask, make sure you know the rules. That's the other thing, what's acceptable or not. And then ask questions, and you can sometimes post your own information, ask for advice. But just, I think to be, you don't have to always post to be active in the room, reading, and also sometimes I post other people's work, and I'll amplify others, because it's a good thing to do. It's always good to amplify and highlight the work of others. It'll come back to you threefold. That's what my grandmother used to say anyway. It comes back to you. The good stuff will come back to you.
Grandmas always know.
So it's a good thing to do. And also, if you have any sense that you want to be a showrunner, you're going to have to learn how to manage other creatives and be supportive and encourage the best out of other creatives. So why not learn how to do it in a group and in a basically kind of in a room with others. So I think being positive, not tearing down others, and be careful, because when you put out something negative, it never goes away, as Amy Cooper learned. And so be careful about what you post, wherever you post it. It doesn't mean you can't have opinions. You should have opinions, but tearing down others, and being highly, highly negative about the work of others, just be very careful about that.
So what's in store for you? What does your future hold? Where do you want to go? Do you want to be a showrunner? Do you want to be writing features? Do you want to be directing features? All of the above? What's in store?
Yes, all of the above. And I have a few things in the works. I just signed a right to shop with producer Fearworks for my own original horror feature, for me to direct it next year. And so they have 50% of the financing, and they're going out for the other half. And I mentioned I have a sci-fi series that is that's being taken out to networks by a production company. And I'm writing a comic book called Omni, and I just had a meeting about a sci-fi book that I'm in the middle of writing with everything else.
You are busy.
I'm busy. I've made a few film pitches for major projects, which is, that's like free hard work, but it's good learning. And if it's for the right project and it's somebody you really want to work with, I think it's worth doing. And taking lots of meetings for the next thing that comes along. And there's a bunch of other things, some things I can't talk about, but it's all really good. And I'm a great believer in keeping a lot of irons in the fire, because you put up 20, 10 of them might go forward. Of those 10, 5 you'll have a real meeting over, and 2, hey, something's going to happen, and then only 1 goes forward.
That's right.
So
it's a numbers game.
It is a numbers game. And so I have these Post-its. I should show you. Should I show you my Post-it?
Please, yes.
I'm not going to show you what's on them, but wait, where are they? So I have these Post-its that you can't see. There they are.
Oh,
and so they're these things all the way up the wall. They go all the way down. And they're all the projects that I'm currently working on.
Wow.
Including a documentary that's also in the works. So I think it's all good. You don't want to fritter your energy away, but I've had a lot of stuff, and a lot of people, you're out there working, keep generating, keep creating. If you want to direct, I directed a short film during COVID on my cell phone and submitted it to festivals. You just keep being your own generator of your own creativity, And then when buzz happens and things hit for you, you'll have all these things that you could kind of slap up or put into the fire, and hopefully one of them will become something real and move forward. But that's yeah, I advocate. A friend of mine asked me, should I be taking everything? Should I be doing everything? I'm like, as much as you can. Yes. Yeah. Go for it.
Well, I am very happy for you and very proud of you,
Thank you.
for many reasons. But it's been wonderful to see your evolution over the years in the group. And I can't thank you enough for taking some time from your afternoon to speak to our members. I hope that those of you who are watching will chime in down below, say hello to Melody, and also look for her posts in the group. And thank you so much. It was such a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you. It's fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks.